Shawn Rostker, research analyst with the Council for a Livable World and Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, Washington, joins me. Shawn, how do you interpret the way America and the Trump administration is seeing the heightened tensions between India and Pakistan? It almost seems here that the US has decided, at least for now, on a moderately hands-off approach.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. The United States is watching this situation, I'd say, with deep concern, not just because of the immediate violence, but because of how quickly these crises can escalate between two nuclear armed states. Washington does understand the domestic pressures both governments are facing, but it also knows from past experience how narrow the margin is for error. And right now, the focus is on urging restraint behind the scenes and encouraging both sides to avoid actions that box themselves in.
But how important for the Trump administration, Shawn, is what happens in the Indian subcontinent? We've seen Donald Trump, in general, say that his administration doesn't want to expand US involvement in global conflicts. He would rather create a situation where these conflicts are settled sooner rather than later, then whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's the conflict in the Middle East. Is India top of the mind, you believe, for this administration, given particularly the fact that these are two nuclear neighbors?
Well, the Trump administration has a clear interest in preventing instability between India and Pakistan. While it's obviously focused elsewhere publicly on many different global issues, officials do understand that even a limited conflict between India and Pakistan could spiral dangerously. The US doesn't want to be drawn in. It doesn't want to see India and Pakistan devolve further into any further conflict. And it doesn't want to see a situation unfold that endangers further lives, disrupts the region, or tests any nuclear thresholds. So quiet diplomacy is likely happening, even if the public posture is more restrained.
The reason I ask you is because there's also a China angle there, Shawn. China is the one country which is seen to have a close strategic relationship with Pakistan at the moment. And there has always been the suspicion that China will back Pakistan in the United Nations. For example, every time India has tried to sort of corner Pakistan on its involvement with terror. Trump has a clear agenda to look at China as a country that America is wary of, both for its economic outreach and its military power. How do you see that? Do you believe that there is a China angle to what we're seeing playing out here in the subcontinent? And will the Americans see it in that way?
So China's relationship with Pakistan is obviously longstanding, but it doesn't mean Beijing wants an active conflict on its doorstep. China may offer diplomatic cover or rhetorical support, but it's unlikely to encourage escalation. I think from the Trump administration's perspective, any attempt by China to exploit the crisis would be viewed with suspicion, but I don't think that's where the administration is thinking. I think all major powers, including China, understand that to destabilize South Asia serves no one's interests. And again, this is a moment for caution, not competition.
Is there a recognition, though, that India has been a victim of Pak-based terror, that groups like the lashkar-e-taiba, the jaish-e-mohammad have, in a way, with impunity, struck in India, often at civilians, as we saw in Pahalgam? Is there a recognition, a realization, and therefore India gets a lot more space this time because there is, because the world needs to understand that there is, as India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar put, zero tolerance for terror, whichever part of the world it happens.
Absolutely. There is broad recognition in Washington that India has suffered enormously from terrorism in the past, and up including to the most recent attack. That concern is taken seriously, and there is strong sympathy for India's right to protect its citizens. Any sovereign nation has the right to defend itself. At the same time, there's an understanding that retaliation, while emotionally and politically powerful, driven by various forces, has to be carefully calibrated to avoid any unintended consequences. I think justice and security can't come at the cost of uncontrollable escalation.
You know, it's interesting you're saying that because we're just flashing on the channel, Shahbaz Sharif has addressed the Pakistani nation and is saying that Pakistan will not step back, that Pakistan will retaliate. Now, this is the Pakistani Prime Minister once again ratcheting up the temperature, and this is the worry of getting on an escalatory spiral. Do you believe that the United States can use sufficient diplomatic power, its ability to make sure that Pakistan in particular is reined in? For years, the US had considerable influence over Islamabad. Do you believe that influence still exists with the Trump administration? Can they say to Islamabad, back off?
So the US has influence, but not control. I think what Washington can do, and likely is doing, is using its channels, both formal and informal, with both sides to urge restraint and remind Pakistan that escalation would isolate it diplomatically and risk even more serious consequences. But the responsibility isn't on one side alone.
You see, Shawn, Donald Trump sending that kind of message to Islamabad?
I'd say there's quiet diplomacy happening behind the scenes. And we've already had reports that Secretary Marco Rubio is in touch with various officials on both sides. But the responsibility, as I'll say, isn't on one side alone. Preventing a wider conflict requires both India and Pakistan to recognize the danger of escalation and leave space for political off-ramps.
Let me leave it there, Shawn Rostker. Joining me there from Washington. Appreciate you taking the time to give us a sense of what the how the Trump administration is seeing escalating tensions in the subcontinent. Thanks very much.